Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
The Storm Pirates by Drinor. What if Luffy never ate the Gomu Gomu no Mi? Instead, he devours the Arashi Arashi no Mi, the Storm fruit, gaining the power of tempests, lightning, and wind itself. With the power of the storm in his hands, Monkey D. Luffy will turn the world upside down and forge a new legend as the captain of the Storm Pirates. Big shout out to the warlords of this channel: Throat Punch, Rodarius Jones, Native Warrior, Claude Lefrace, Neo-Esker 23, Derek Dowdy, Zazu Syaz, Abdul Rauf Ali, N3WT, What If Lord, Black Money Young Leon, Garrick Russell, Case Clark, KSGPL4YZ, and Brian McKenzie. You know who you are. Want to stand among the warlords? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios.
891 Chapter 5. Roronoa Zoro and Lightning Sword. I want to see who this Roronoa Zoro is, and who knows, maybe I'll be able to recruit him into my crew, Luffy said as they walked through town. Koby began pleading with Luffy to find someone else as soon as he said that. Luffy, seriously, you're insane if you think getting this guy to join you is the right thing to do, a terrified Koby said. Luffy just spoke with an uncaring expression on his face. Well, since you said he's been captured, that means I can set him free, and whether he joins or not is up to him, Luffy explained as he approached one of the locals. Luffy turned to the man and inquired, are they really keeping that Zoro guy here? Everyone who was close enough to hear the question jumped back with a look of pure horror on their face the moment Zoro's name left his mouth. I'll take that as a yes, Luffy said before walking away, followed by Koby and Nami. Perhaps we shouldn't mention the name Zoro here, Koby said quietly to Luffy. Let's just go to the base. You said you wanted to be a marine, right? Luffy asked as they continued walking towards the marine base. Of course, I do, Luffy, Koby said, but I don't feel ready just yet. From what I've heard, the man in charge of this base is named Captain Morgan. Everyone within hearing distance of Morgan's name jumped back and gave a horrified expression, similar to how Zoro's name elicited. Luffy and Nami's eyes narrowed as they watched this, and Luffy thought to himself. It appears this is one of those marine bases, Luffy reflected. Nami, on the other hand, found it strange. She didn't have a positive impression of marines in general, but seeing people fearful was a bad sign, especially because it reminded her of her own village. Luffy looked over to Koby, who had a puzzled expression on his face. He then turned to face Luffy and began speaking. I mean, I understand them being afraid of Zoro and all, but why a marine captain? Koby wondered. Before speaking, Luffy's face took on a more sympathetic expression as he looked at Koby. You will learn that in the world we live in, you cannot believe everything you are told. You must be able to see the world for yourself and come to your own conclusions. Grandpa always said that not all pirates are bad, and not all marines are good. He dislikes criminals, but he told me, sometimes a good man wears the suit of a criminal, and sometimes a criminal wears the suit of justice, Luffy said, quoting his grandfather. Remember Koby, power can turn good people bad, Nami said, surprising Koby, who looked like he didn't want to believe what had just been told to him. Nami had to agree with Luffy's point of view, and she wondered who his grandfather was to know so much about the world. Looking at Luffy, she remembered what he had said to her the night before. Which way do you want to go? Luffy inquired. The moon had risen in the sky, the only sound of the night being the sound of small waves crashing against the boat. Koby was sleeping peacefully. Nami still awake, keeping her guard up despite knowing she couldn't do much against someone like Luffy. She simply said, I need to go to Orange Town, because she was stuck here and there was no harm in telling him, and she hadn't forgotten how Luffy had saved her life from the cannonball. Why? Let's just say I had to find something, Nami explained. You must be an expert navigator if you know where you're going? Luffy inquired, his hat in his right hand, his interest piqued. I'm not just any navigator, I'm the best, she nearly exclaimed before realizing Koby was fast asleep. Amazing, join my crew, Luffy said as he leaned in closer to her, causing her to back away slightly. Nami yelled at him, pointing a finger at him, hell no, I hate pirates. Be my nakama, as my nakama, I will protect you, even from pirates who have harmed you, Luffy stated earnestly. Nami was taken aback by his words, but she remained silent despite a glimmer of hope in her mind. Why do you hold the hat like that? She inquired, shifting the conversation's focus to the hat. It can't be that valuable, she reasoned, knowing that a straw hat didn't have much berry value. This is my prize, my most valuable possession. This was given to me by a man important to me, he said, holding the hat against his chest and flashing a new smile that Nami seemed to like. Luffy noticed something out of the corner of his eye as they walked and looked to the left to see a man tied to a post in the open courtyard. Luffy smiled to himself. Koby was about to say something to Luffy when Luffy turned left and began walking along the walls until he suddenly stopped in front of one of the walls and began climbing it, causing Koby to panic and scream at Luffy. Luffy, what exactly are you up to? You'll be noticed, yelled a panicked Koby, and Nami wanted to tell him to relax. So, there you are, Mr. Pirate Hunter, Luffy said as he looked at the man strapped to the cross. Koby turned pale and peered over the fence, hoping Luffy was mistaken for someone else, but one look at the man told Koby he was the pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro. Nami had to admit that he appeared intimidating, but the way he was dressed, not to mention the fact that he was clearly tired and hungry, reminded Nami that one should not judge a person by their appearance, especially someone like Luffy. Zoro was a muscular young man of average height with lightly tanned skin and green hair, 3 identical gold earrings on his left earlobe, and a green bandana tied around his head. He wore black trousers tucked inside black boots, a plain white shirt with 3 undone buttons at the collar, and his green haramaki. You 3 are an eyesore, he said, drawing their attention. Get lost, he said coldly, causing Koby to scream and Luffy to look bored. Koby said to Luffy, Luffy, let us just get out of here, but he was ignored, and then the 3 of them heard something hit the side of the wall to their left. Luffy could only stare at the girl as he threw a rope over the wall and climbed over. The little girl then ran towards Zoro with a huge smile on her face. Despite not knowing Luffy for a long time, Nami remembered him saying that a pirate should help people in need, so Nami believed Luffy would not just stay put if the girl was truly in danger. The girl then approached Zoro, who did not appear pleased to see her. What are you doing here? Get lost, he said to the little girl in a harsh voice, trying to scare her, but she just smiled. I figured you were getting hungry by now. As she looked at Zoro, she said, so, I made you a couple of rice balls. Do you want to die, kid? Scram, he said to her, but she didn't seem to want to move an inch. However, you haven't eaten anything during your confinement. I never really made them before, she said as he held up 2 rice balls, but I did my best so I think they're fine, she said, trying to persuade Zoro to take the rice balls. Listen, kid, I don't want to eat. Now get lost and stop bothering me, Zoro yelled at the girl. And the little girl's smile vanished for the first time, replaced by a frown, just as she was about to say something. But, she started, but Zoro cut her off. Don't make me kick your behind, little girl. Nami was about to tell Zoro to be kinder to the girl when the gates of the marine base began to open and 3 figures could be seen entering. No one likes a bully, the man in the middle of 2 marines said, but you seem to be handling this well, Roronoa Zoro. Don't you think so? Koby breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that the marines were on their way to save the girl, but Nami didn't like the way the one blonde was walking or looking at them. Looky here, some tasty rice balls, said the man in the middle as he snatched one of the little girl's rice balls. Luffy narrowed his eyes at the group that had just entered the base. No way. That's not for you, the little girl screamed at the man, biting down on the rice ball and making a disgusted face. Ah, it's far a lot of sugar in it. You should add salt, the man screamed at the little girl, who looked as if her heart had been broken just moments before. But I thought it would taste better sweet, the little girl lamented, as the man snatched the other rice ball from her and tossed it on the floor, causing the little girl to cry. Koby yelled at the jerks, they're marines, why they're acting like that. It appears that you have not read the notice that was posted today by my father. Anyone caught assisting a criminal in any way will be put to death, the man said, causing the little girl to flinch when he mentioned Morgan's name. He chuckled at her reaction before continuing, it seems even you know my father's name. So, he's Captain Morgan's son, Luffy muttered quietly enough for Koby and Nami to hear. Nami took a close stance next to Koby, while Luffy took a step back. "Since you're only a little girl, you throw her over the fence," he said, smirking as he looked down at the paled girl. Nami and Koby's eyes widened. "But sir, she's only... Are you trying to disobey me? Do I need to call father?" he yelled at the Marine, who paused for a moment before gently grabbing the crying girl on his arm. Before throwing the girl over the fence, the Marine whispered, "Just tuck into a ball, it should minimize the damage." Nami dashed after her, hoping to catch her before she was hurt. Luffy suddenly vanished before he caught her in mid-flight and safely landed with her in his arms, the little girl smiling at him. Koby rushed over to Luffy and the little girl said, "Wow, thank you, mister. Why don't you take this little girl home with you, Koby? There's something I need to do," Luffy said solemnly as he transformed into lightning and vanished. Nami, Koby, and the girl all walked away, but the orange-haired girl couldn't help but admire Luffy's actions. Not all pirates are like that. She remembered his words and couldn't help but think that not all pirates were trash like that monster. When lightning struck the ground and the man who had been on the fence earlier appeared in the spot where the lightning had struck, Zoro, who was still tied to the cross, was startled, and all he could do was stare at the man with eyes the size of dinner plates. "How did you do that?" Zoro inquired, Luffy maintaining a solemn expression before grinning as usual as he spoke. "I ate a devil fruit," Luffy explained, and Zoro nodded to indicate that he understood. He had heard of devil fruits but had never believed they existed, and Zoro then gave Luffy a serious look before speaking. "So, what exactly are you looking for?" he inquired. "Do you want to be set free?" Luffy suggested. "I can easily do that. I won't need a knife or sword for that," but Zoro scoffed. "Take care of your own business," Zoro screamed, making Luffy sigh. "If you stay like this for a few more days, you'll starve. I'll come back later to ask again." "Wait, hold on," he said, drawing Luffy's attention to the situation. "Could you pick that up for me?" he inquired, his gaze falling on the crushed rice balls on the ground, and Luffy looked at him as if he were insane. "Are you going to eat it? It's mostly mud," Luffy said as he bent down and picked up the squished rice ball, prompting Zoro to yell at him. "Shut up and hand it over to me. Now," he yelled, and Luffy picked up the muddy rice ball and fed it to him. After Zoro finished eating the muddy rice ball, he looked Luffy in the eyes and said, "Tell the little girl they were delicious." Luffy smiled at him, knowing Zoro would make an excellent nakama. "Restaurant, did he really eat it all?" The girl beams with delight. "He did, Rika," Luffy confirmed with a nod. "He told me to tell you it was delicious, the best thing he'd ever eaten." "I don't get it," Koby pondered as he sat next to Luffy at the bar. "Isn't he supposed to be some kind of monster?" "No, big brother Zoro is really nice," Rika screamed right in his face, causing the pudgy pink head to jerk backwards from the young girl. He had done nothing wrong. "Then why is he chained?" Nami inquired from her seat on Luffy's opposite side. "It's because of me," Rika explained, her eyes welling up with tears. "That jerk Helmeppo had a wolf that he used to terrorize the town. It came here with him to Mom's restaurant and started scaring all the customers," she exclaimed angrily. "Before big brother Zoro sliced it up, it was about to attack me. Helmeppo, on the other hand, told him he'd have me and Mommy executed for it if he didn't make a deal with him." "That's terrible," exclaims Koby. "Why aren't the Marines doing anything about it?" Nami exclaimed. "Everyone is afraid of him because he's Captain Morgan's son," Rika said, tears streaming down her face. "Big brother Zoro is starving out there because he saved me. Even while tied up, that stupid onion head punches and kicks Zoro. Morgan irritates me. He's a tyrant. But no one is brave enough to confront him." Suddenly, the door slammed open, revealing the blonde SBAG himself. "I'm so hungry," Helmeppo sneered at Rika's mother. "You got that? We're eating here for free. Please hurry up and bring me some booze." "What is it that is taking you so long?" Before opening his mouth again, he took a look around the restaurant. "Oh, and because I'm bored, I've decided to execute Zoro tomorrow," he exclaimed. "Look forward to it, everyone," he burst out laughing. Luffy had enough of the blonde ass hat by this point, and he stood up, his hat shading his eyes. "Luffy?" Nami inquired, trembling, knowing full well what he was about to do. Luffy stalked up to Helmeppo's laughing form and slammed his fist into the blonde's face. Helmeppo's head warped around Luffy's fist and the rest of his body lifted clean off his chair before crashing through the wall and landing in a heap in the street in front of the restaurant. The other customers inside the restaurant stared at him in disbelief as the pirate grabbed both of the Marines with Helmeppos. "Who da, L or, ooh. Don't you?" Luffy growled at the sniveling blonde. "You're trash, nothing more. Captain Morgan, and I'm his son, I'll have you executed for this," Helmeppo managed to say through the swelling in his face and jaw. The blonde made a threat. "You better run back to daddy before I punch you again," Luffy said, threatening to make Helmeppo flinch in fear. The blonde's marine bodyguards groaned and picked up Helmeppo before returning to the base. "You know you just made that scene you were trying to avoid," Nami said as she approached Luffy. "Now the base is probably going to be on high alert. How am I supposed to get what I came for now?" she wondered. "Is that what you're looking for in the base? I'll assist you in obtaining it. I kinda want to meet this Captain Morgan and punch him in the face as well." Luffy grinned, causing Nami to sigh and smile. "I'll hold you accountable." With a grin, Nami asked, "Just make a good distraction for me." Later, "You again. What are you looking for?" Zoro inquired, and Luffy began walking forward until he was only a few feet away before speaking. "That idiot's son was never planning on following through on his end of the deal," Luffy said, surprising Zoro. "He was going to have you executed tomorrow." Zoro's eyes widened and he began thrashing and yelling. "What a sniveling little jerk. When I get my hands on him, he'll wish his daddy had flushed him down the toilet like he should have," he yelled. Zoro said, making Luffy chuckle before continuing. "By the way, when I heard he was going to execute you tomorrow, I knocked a few teeth down his throat," Luffy said with a grin before continuing. "So, there's a good chance your execution was postponed today," Luffy said, widening Zoro's eyes even more. "Untie me so I can kick that jerk in the nuts," he screamed, making Luffy laugh once more. "This is where my offer comes in. I can untie you and let you live, but you'll have to join my crew," Luffy said, making Zoro pause for a moment before responding. "What crew are you talked? I'm assembling a pirate crew, and I'm looking for people to join. So, what is your response?" Luffy inquired, and Zoro remained silent for a moment before responding. "Listen, that idiot's son stole my swords. If you can recover them, I'll join your crew," Zoro said, making Luffy smile before transforming into lightning and teleporting away. Every marine on the base could be seen raising a massive stone statue of Captain Morgan, while the captain in charge of the marine base, Axe Hand, Morgan, stood off to the side looking at his men working. Morgan was a tall, muscular man with blonde hair and a steel jaw, his right hand replaced by a massive steel axe, the handle of which seemed to go right through his forearm, and he wore a large, billowing coat like a cape. Behind Morgan lay the crying form of his son Helmeppo. "Now, men, stand it up. Show off my brilliance to the rest of the world," Morgan yelled at his men. And as the Marines were pulling the giant statue upright, a bolt of lightning struck the statue's center, widening everyone's eyes. Just when everyone thought things couldn't get any stranger, there was Luffy standing in the spot where the lightning had struck, staring at everyone. "What am I standing on? This god-awful thing? No one will miss something this ugly," Luffy said as he raised his right leg in the air and coated it with armament haki before stomping his leg on the statue, causing every Marine present to start sweating. At first, nothing appeared to have happened, causing a few Marines to breathe a sigh of relief, but 5 seconds later, the entire statue suddenly crumbled to dust, leaving Morgan shaking with rage before yelling, "Death to him!" When everyone looked at the spot where Luffy was standing, they saw that he had vanished and was now standing by the door with Helmeppo. "I need you to show me where Zoro's swords are," Luffy said as he walked through the doors of the Marine base, Helmeppo slung over his shoulders, as if he didn't have a care in the world. "They're in my room," Helmeppo said, "It's the door on your left." As they stood in front of the door, Luffy kicked it open and tossed Helmeppo inside, then sent a wave of Conqueror's Haki at him, knocking him out. Luffy took a look around the room and immediately noticed how girly it was. The walls were pink, the furniture was pink with flowers on it, and everything about it said it belonged to a girl. Luffy initially believed Helmeppo had misled him and taken him to the wrong room, but when he saw the 3 swords braced against the wall, he knew he was in the right place, so he grabbed the swords and looked out the window, where he saw something that made his eyes widen. A terrified Koby and Nami, who had a knife in her hand, stood in the courtyard where Zoro was being held captive, trying to free Zoro surrounded by Marines and Morgan himself. As the Marines prepared to fire on Zoro, Nami, and Koby, Luffy flung open the window and instantly transformed into lightning before teleporting to the courtyard. Luffy appeared in front of Koby, Nami, and Zoro with his usual lightning strike, putting Koby, Nami, and Zoro at ease for a moment while startling the Marines. "The kid with the straw hat. Fire at him!" Morgan yelled at his men, and Luffy immediately wrapped himself in armament haki and waited for the guns to fire. He didn't have to wait long because, seconds after Morgan gave the order, every Marine with a gun pulled the trigger. What happened next stunned everyone. The bullets that were fired at Luffy hit him, but did no damage. They simply squished to the ground as if they had hit a metal wall. "That won't work on me," Luffy said, his eyes cold as a killer as he stared at them. "Can you tell me who you are?" Zoro asked, his eyes the size of dinner plates, and Luffy turned him around and cut him free with one of Zoro's swords before speaking. "My name is Monkey D. Luffy," Luffy said as he handed the swords to Zoro, "and I'm going to be king of the pirates." Morgan gave his men new orders before Zoro could say anything to Luffy. "Use your swords if bullets don't work." As he said that, all the Marines drew their swords and charged Luffy, Zoro, and Koby. Before they could reach them, Zoro intercepted them, holding off each of their swords with all three of his. Luffy was taken aback by the fact that Zoro was wielding 3 swords. Zoro held 2 katanas in his hands and the third katana he placed in his mouth. "Make one move and you die," Zoro said to the Marines, causing a few of them to cry, before turning his attention back to Luffy and saying, "Today I officially became a criminal because I fought against the Marines. So, I can assure you that I will become a pirate, but there is one thing I want you to know. I dedicate myself to achieving my ambition while I am with you," he said, turning to face him before speaking. "Which one is it?" Zoro smiled and spoke with a lot of determination when Luffy asked. "To become the greatest swordsman in the world and nothing less," he said, smiling at Luffy before responding. "The king of the pirates would have no less on his crew," Luffy said. "What are you waiting for, men? Go ahead and kill them," he yelled, and his men all backed away from Zoro, allowing him to stand before speaking in a terrified tone. "Sir, we're not going to be able to beat them," one Marine said. "They're monsters," said someone else. "If we face them, we will only die," yelled another Marine, Morgan trembling with rage. "Every Marine who is spouting weakness, pull out your gun and shoot yourself in the head. This is a direct order," Morgan yelled, and Luffy initially thought he was crazy for giving such an order because no one would be stupid enough to obey it. But Luffy was surprised when the Marines actually raised their guns to shoot themselves. "What a bunch of idiots," Luffy thought to himself as he watched the Marines raise their guns to shoot themselves. Luffy quickly fired a controlled blast of Conqueror's Haki at the Marines, knocking them out and leaving them foaming at the mouth. Morgan quickly caught himself and swallowed his fear before speaking. "A leader who cares so little for the lives of his own men is nothing but S," Luffy said in a tone that sent shivers up Morgan's spine. They were S-bags. In this world, power and titles are all that matters. That's something a knucklehead like you would never comprehend, Morgan yelled as he charged towards Luffy, but he abruptly came to a halt. Luffy's right arm had turned to lightning, and a bolt of lightning flew towards Morgan's chest. Zoro had expected the man to be electrocuted, but the bolt of lightning pierced his chest like butter, taking the shape of a sword made of lightning. Morgan collapsed to his knees before spitting a large amount of blood leaking from his mouth, eyes, and ears before falling to the ground, dead. Instead of trying to exact revenge on Luffy as he had expected, the Marine soldiers who were unconscious on the ground began to regain consciousness as he walked back towards them, and when they saw the body of their dead captain on the ground, they began cheering and thanking Luffy for freeing them from Morgan's reign. "It appears they were all afraid of Morgan before we showed up," Koby said, drawing Luffy's attention. However, just as he was about to respond, he heard something hit the ground next to him, and when he turned to see what it was, he saw his first mate passed out on the ground. "Well, we'd better get him some food," Luffy said as he picked up Zoro and slung him over his shoulder before heading to Rika's bar, closely followed by Nami, who was grinning at what Luffy had done, grateful that he had saved her life for the second time. Later, "Oh my goodness, I'm stuffed. Having not eaten in 3 weeks, I was ready to munch down on my bootstrap," Zoro said as he sat at the table with an empty plate in front of him, eliciting laughter from Rika, Nami, and her mother. Zoro then turned to Luffy and asked, "So, how many others have you gathered for this? Couldn't help but smile at his first antics. Mates." Zoro looked at Luffy as if he was insane when he replied, "Just you and maybe Nami." "So you, the witch, and I constitute a pirate crew?" Zoro inquired. "Who are you referring to as a witch?" Nami shrieked with shark teeth, but Zoro ignored her. "Don't worry, we'll have more members soon," says Luffy. A group of Marines entered the bar just as Zoro was about to say something, and looked at Luffy, who didn't seem bothered by their presence. "Hey, you guys over there, we heard you're pirates. Is there any truth to this rumor?" A Marine who Luffy assumed was the highest-ranking officer on the base said. Before taking a bite of meat, Luffy replied, "Yes, we are. We appreciate everything you did to save our town from that dreadful tyrant who terrorized us for so long, but now that we know you're pirates, we can't stand by and watch you do your thing. As a result, you and your crew will need to leave town immediately, and we will not report you to headquarters out of respect for what you have done," said the Marine, prompting protests outside. Luffy then raised his hand, commanding everyone to be quiet before speaking. "That's fine, everyone, we were planning on leaving anyway," Luffy said before reaching into his coat and pulling out a transponder snail, which he placed on the table before dialing a number. The snail rang for about 10 seconds before someone picked up. "Hello," a man on the other end of the transponder snail said, and Luffy replied with a smile. "Does this belong to Vice Admiral Garp?" Luffy said, widening the eyes of every Marine and civilian to the size of dinner plates. "This is him," he says. "Who is this person?" Garp inquired, and Luffy replied with a smile. "Your grandson," Luffy said, causing everyone's jaws to drop, which he chuckled at. "Luffy, you brat, how are you doing? Have you started yet? Don't tell me your boat sank," Garp said, causing Luffy to roll his eyes and respond. "Anyway, I called because I knew you always wanted me to join the Marines," Luffy said with a smile that made Garp chuckle. "However, I found a replacement for you," Luffy said, his eyes widening as he looked at Koby. "Oh, and who is this replacement, exactly?" Garp inquired, his interest piqued. "There's a kid named Koby," Luffy said. "I think you'll like him. He's a little weak and a coward, but I think you'll like him." Garp sighed and replied after about 30 seconds of silence. "I'll take him, and just watch as he kicks your ass up and down the Grand Line when I'm done with him," Garp said, causing Luffy to chuckle. "He is in Shell's Town in the East Blue. By the way, Shell's Town is going to need a new Marine captain. I had to kick Morgan's ass, let's just say, he wore the wrong uniform," Luffy said. Everyone got confused except Nami, who understood the hidden meaning behind it. "Very well, Luffy," said a growl on the other end of the line. "Well, Gramps, I've got to go. I'm sure we'll run into each other soon, so until then," Luffy said, making Garm laugh. "Take care of yourself, brat," Garp said as he hung up the phone. Luffy stood up and walked over to Koby, placing the snail back in his coat. "You can fulfill your dream now," Luffy said, turning to Zoro and Nami and saying, "Get your things, we are leaving." Zoro grabbed his swords and stood up to leave. Nami didn't have anything to carry since they were safe back at the boat. Luffy then turned to the Marines and said, "Take care of Koby until my grandfather shows up, will ya?" as he, Nami, and Zoro began walking out the door. The Marines could only nod in agreement, and Zoro was dissatisfied with the boat. "Well, Captain, where do we go from here?" As he sat his swords down in the boat, Zoro inquired. "We need to find a treasure in Orange Town," Luffy said, Nami suddenly having berry eyes. 891 Chapter 6. Buggy the Clown. The sun hung low on the horizon, the faint orange glow casting long shadows over the trio as they walked away from the small town. For a while, the only sounds were their footsteps crunching against the dirt road and the occasional whistle of the wind. Then, abruptly, Nami whirled on Luffy, her face flushed with fury. "Luffy." He blinked at her, tilting his head with that ever-innocent grin. "Yeah? Why didn't you tell us your grandfather is Garp the hero?" she demanded, planting her hands on her hips. "You know, the man who's basically a Marine legend." Zoro raised an eyebrow, curious but far less animated than Nami. Luffy shrugged as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You didn't ask." Nami's eye twitched. "We didn't ask? Do you expect us to just randomly wonder?" Hey, is your grandpa one of the most famous Marines of all time? Luffy laughed, scratching the back of his head. Kinda? You. Nami's voice rose to a scream, shark teeth flashing as she lunged at him. Zoro snorted, crossing his arms as he watched the scene. You're loud enough to scare off every pirate in the East Blue. Stay out of this, swordsman. Nami snapped before rounding back on Luffy, who was now spinning in circles to avoid her wrath. Do you even realize how insane that is? Garp is your grandfather. What else haven't you told us? Luffy tapped his chin thoughtfully. Oh, did I mention I'm learning Haki? Zoro's interest peaked, his single open eye narrowing. Haki? That thing you did back at the Marine base and the execution yard? What was that? Oh, that? Luffy grinned. Yeah, that's Haki. And you just casually dropped that now? Nami groaned, throwing her hands in the air. What is it? Zoro asked, cutting to the chase. His focus was sharp now, intrigued by the power he'd witnessed. Luffy explained with a grin, it's like weaponizing your soul. There's 3 kinds. The first is Kenbunshoku Haki, observation Haki. Lets you sense stuff you can't see, like movements before they happen. That's how I stopped the bullets back there. Zoro nodded slowly, already imagining how useful that could be in a fight, and the others. Busashoku Haki, armament. Like invisible armor or making your weapons super strong. It's great for slicing through devil fruit defenses, Luffy said, nodding toward Zoro's swords. You'd love it. Zoro's grin widened. Sounds like my kind of thing. And the last one? Nami asked, her curiosity overcoming her frustration. Luffy's expression turned serious for once. Haoshoku Haki, Conqueror's Haki. It's rare. Only 1 in a million have it. It's about using your will to overpower others. That's what I used at the Marine base. 1 in a million? Zoro mused. Think I have it? Luffy shrugged. Maybe. Who knows? And you plan to train us in this, Haki? Nami asked cautiously, already sensing trouble. Yup. Luffy's grin was back, stretching wide, starting with observation Haki. Before she could protest, he pointed a finger at her. A harmless jolt of electricity zapped through her body, making her yelp. What the hell was that? Nami screeched, flailing. Training, Luffy said simply. To dodge attacks, you've gotta feel them coming first. My grandpa used a bat, so I'm going to use a lightning bat. He added with an innocent grin, in his hand, a lightning bat formed. Zoro and Nami knew this would not be easy. A week later, the trio reached Orangetown. The streets were eerily quiet, the buildings battered and abandoned. Looks like a ghost town, Zoro muttered, his hand resting on his sword. Buggy the Clown's here, Nami said grimly. This is his handiwork. If he's the one behind this, Luffy's voice dropped, his tone dark and uncharacteristic, I'll crush him. The sudden shift in Luffy's demeanor sent a chill down Nami's spine. Even Zoro looked unsettled. They continued cautiously until they came across a small shop guarded by a battered dog. Luffy crouched in front of it, grinning. Hey, doggy. Why are you guarding this place? The dog barked, but somehow, Luffy understood. This is your treasure? His master died, an old man explained from nearby. But the dog refuses to leave the store. It's all he has left. Luffy's grin softened. I get it. Memories are important. Nami and Zoro exchanged glances, both quietly moved. Their moment was shattered by a loud explosion. A massive lion emerged from the rubble, accompanied by a flamboyant man. Richie! Destroy that store! The man shouted. The dog barked furiously, standing its ground. Luffy's expression darkened. I'll protect it for you. A wave of Conqueror's Haki swept over the lion, knocking it unconscious. The man yelled, What did you do to Richie? Luffy stepped forward, his voice cold. You knew this was his treasure, and you still tried to destroy it. Before the man could react, Luffy's fist slammed into his chest, sending him crumpling to the ground. Zoro and Nami said nothing, their respect for their captain growing. They soon found the buggy pirates celebrating their reign of terror. Luffy's grin returned as he raised his hand, sending a bolt of lightning crashing into the roof. Buggy emerged, livid. Who dares interrupt my party? You call this a party? You're just trash, Luffy said, his tone dismissive. Hand over the treasure and the map. Buggy snarled. I'll kill you. As the fight began, Nami and Zoro each took their turns battling Buggy's crew, showcasing their growing Haki abilities. Nami's observation Haki saved her from multiple attacks, while Zoro's precision with armament Haki overwhelmed his opponents. Finally, Luffy faced Buggy. The clown tried every trick in his arsenal, but Luffy dodged effortlessly, countering with powerful strikes. The fight ended with Luffy's air fist sending Buggy flying into the horizon. As the dust settled, Nami grinned. "I'll take their loot now." "Leave some for the town," Luffy reminded her, earning a playful glare. "You've got some nerve giving me orders," she teased, but her smile showed she didn't mind. The people of Orangetown emerged, cheering their new heroes. Luffy laughed, his cheerful demeanor back. "Think they'll give us food?" Zoro groaned. "All you ever think about is eating." It had been a few days since they left Orangetown. Luffy trained them every day without mercy. According to him, they were still very far to fight against big enemies like a Yonko and others. It was better to be safe than sorry. At this point, Nami wasn't complaining anymore. She didn't try to say that she was tired, not that trick even worked to begin with. Nami checked the weather and smiled at seeing it was a sunny day. She and Zoro had just finished their training for today. Well, more like she finished. Zoro was still training with Luffy, mostly for his armament Haki. Nami hadn't said out loud, but she had seen the progress she was making. She knew she was still far away from Luffy's level, but better this than nothing. Looking behind her, she saw Luffy dodging Zoro's attacks with a blindfold around his eyes and just laughing every time he heard Zoro growling. Nami giggled at the image and thought back at what Luffy told her the night after he defeated Buggy. Nami kept staring at the night sky, the full moon clear, illuminating the darkness around them. Nami knew she was close, almost there, she told herself. Soon her family could be free, and perhaps after that, she could. "What are you doing still awake, Nami?" She suddenly heard a voice. Turning behind, she saw Luffy with a plate full of meat in his right hand. "Just thinking, Luffy," she spoke with a low tone. From the look her captain gave her, she knew he didn't really believe her. "What about you? You can't sleep?" she asked, trying to change the conversation from her to him. She leaned against the balcony's railing. "I was hungry, so my stomach woke me up," he said with a grin before taking a bite. Nami rolled her eyes. Sometimes Luffy could act like a child. Silence took over them. Nami prepared to go back to her bed, but Luffy looked into her eyes. "I know you're not telling me something. You know you're my nakama, as one. I will walk through hell just to help you, in whatever you might need." Luffy spoke with determination, his voice sincere, speaking no lies. Nami swallowed a breath. She felt guilt in her chest. She didn't know why, but she felt horrible. She bit her lips, wanting to tell Luffy, to tell him everything, but... "I appreciate it, Luffy. Perhaps I will tell you, very soon," she finally spoke. Luffy accepted the answer and grinned and nodded his head. Now, Nami felt she was being unfair to her nakama and captain. She knew Luffy was strong. Luffy defeated the likes of Buggy as if he was a kid, and looking at them now, seeing Luffy dodging the attacks of Zoro as if Zoro was someone who was using a sword for the first time in his life. She silently swore to tell Luffy soon. He was not like the other pirates. He was a kind one, someone she could trust and call captain, and maybe something more. Soon Zoro and Luffy stopped training. Zoro was sweating bullets while Luffy was just relaxing without his shirt on. Nami again found herself distracted by his muscles. They looked quite nice. She felt her hands wanting to go there and touch his chest. It made her feel something she hadn't felt before, like a burning fire on her stomach. "An island? I see an island. Maybe there's a meat store there. Set course for that island." The interruption served to cease Nami's growing naughty thoughts. The boat scraped against wet sand, and the budding Straw Hat crew stepped onto terra firma. Luffy grinned and examined the surroundings as Nami consulted her maps to find info on the island, and Zoro stretched. "Someone's watching us," Luffy suddenly stated. This put both Nami and Zoro on guard. Zoro put his hand on the pommel of his sword. They got their answer when pirate flags tied to sticks rose up all across the bushes at the top of the cliff face, and projectiles suddenly erupted against the sand at Luffy's feet. Out of nowhere, a man appeared at an outcropping halfway down the cliff. A green bandana slightly tamed his bushy black hair. He wore brown overalls, yellowish boots, and had a bag slung over one shoulder. His most prominent feature was his thin, 3-inch nose. "Halt!" he yelled out in a vaguely overdramatic fashion. "If you're planning on taking over this island, forget about it. I'm the captain of the pirate crew that rules the village. Men and children adore me as Captain Usopp. Leave right now, or my 80 million men will crush you all." This was all said in a tone that practically screamed, "Liar." "Please, he's obviously lying. If you're going to lie, make it believable." Usopp gave a jerk, as if honestly surprised that she'd seen through it, before resuming his extravagant tone, shouting, "80 million might be an exaggeration, but my men are more than a match for you." Nami gave a little grin, asking, "You mean all 3 of them?" At her words, 3 kids with oddly shaped heads popped out of the bushes and started running away, screaming all the while. Usopp was now thoroughly deflated, but he seemed to muster some kind of desperate courage. He pulled out a slingshot and a pachinko before lining up with Luffy, who had his hat shading his eyes. "Alright. I lied about all that. But, you still can't come here. As you saw, my skills with the slingshot are greater than that of a pistol. I can't allow you to pass. My honor won't allow it. That's why people call me Usopp, the Proud." As if to contradict his words, Usopp's entire body was trembling with fear. His aim remained steady, however. Luffy grinned. He liked this guy. It was time to test his character. "Risk your life," Luffy said, drawing confusion from his crew and Usopp. "With that shot, you will risk your life," Luffy repeated, looking up to stare at Usopp. "This isn't a kid's game." With those words, Luffy brought his haki to the surface, not actively using it, just shaping it into a kind of vibe that wouldn't be agreeable with the faint of heart. Zoro was unaffected, being pretty tolerant of Luffy's haki, though Nami seemed a tad sweaty. Usopp, at the other extreme, went into near convulsions of fear. Luffy's eyes never wavered from his stare. Zoro added fuel to the fire with, "The man before you is a true pirate, don't toy with us." Slowly, Usopp sank to his knees, slingshot forgotten. "I should have known," he said. "The words of a true pirate are much more intimidating than my own." He hung his head. He was still conscious, which told Luffy a whole lot right there, such as the fact that despite the man's obvious fear of conflict, he had an iron will that he might not even be aware of. Luffy grinned. He and Zoro exchanged glances before bursting out laughing, eliciting a small smile from Nami and a look of confusion from Usopp. When Luffy was in control again, he yelled up at Usopp, "Oi, isn't your dad Usopp? I used to know him? Let's talk over food?" The words were such a surprise that Usopp fell from her perch to collide with the ground. However, he picked himself up without difficulty, looked the crew up and down as if trying to decide something before he started grinning and laughing as some switch had flipped on his personality. In a much more jovial mood, he led the 3 of them up the trail to a small village, where he proceeded to treat them at a restaurant. Along the way, Luffy noted the glares of mixed annoyance and weary tolerance thrown Usopp's way. It was obvious even to him that Usopp's lying was a big thorn in everyone's side, but they were so used to it that they'd grown comfortable in the habit. Still, one day they might snap. Luffy noted this out of the corner of his eye, more concerned with the heavenly smell of cooked meat under his nose as he enjoyed the meal Usopp had bought for them. "So, you knew my dad?" Usopp asked, waiting until the odd pirate crew had started with their meal. Luffy nodded vigorously, simultaneously consuming meat and apples at a rate that would make a lesser man sick. "Yeah, he was on Shanks' crew when they were based at my village," Luffy said, taking a break in his feasting. "Your dad was a pretty cool guy. He was the best marksman ever. He once shot the wings off a fly while I watched it talking about his son, saying how he wished he could be with him." Luffy grinned wildly. "I heard so much about you growing up, Usopp. My ears practically fell off." Usopp grinned insanely as if Luffy had just given him the best news of his life. "My father talked about me, you say? Bragged, even?" Luffy nodded, returning to his food for a while. Usopp seemed to be on an endorphin high for a little. Soon they talked about what they were doing and where they were going next, with Luffy stating that they would soon go to the Grand Line. Usopp, who'd been totally lost up to this point, suddenly looked like he was having a stroke. Everyone at the table looked at him in concern before he managed to stutter out, "TT the G Grand LL Line?" At that, Luffy, Nami, and Zoro all sighed, forgetting that the crew's destination was the object of much fear. Luffy patted Usopp on the back, slightly clearing the man's lungs after they'd contracted in proxy fear. Cheer up, we're strong, besides, I'm the one who's going to find One Piece and become the Pirate King. I need to go to the Grand Line to do that. The logic was groundless and straightforward, but it seemed to hit home. Usopp's gaze turned inward before he started to talk as if to himself. My dream is to be a brave warrior of the sea, like my father before me. He's in the Grand Line. If I could make it there. His expression was oddly somber before he closed his eyes and smiled as if suddenly thinking of a joke. It's too bad I'm too big a coward to leave this village. I like you guys, but with all respect, you're sailing to your deaths. Still, is there any way I can help you with? I want to be able to say I at least tried to help. Luffy grinned before shaking his head. It was up to Usopp to realize that his heart had already decided. Focusing on the present, Luffy addressed the immediate problem for the crew. Now that you mention it, is there a place we can find a ship? We can't keep going around in two small boats, or at least that's what Nami says. I don't see why, but she's the smart one, so. He failed to notice how Nami flushed slightly at the compliment. Usopp looked as if his first instinct was to lie and say there was no such place, but then his mouth closed as he started to consider it. He'd promised, hadn't he? Besides, this man had the kind of aura that made Usopp want to earn his trust, not abuse it. Debating internally, he finally decided to take the right-hand path. Well, I'm friends with the Ajo-sama that lives in the mansion up the hill. She's been depressed since her parents died, and I've been amusing her with my lies. Maybe if I put in a good word, she'd consider having a ship commissioned for you. Is that okay with you guys? Luffy grinned, looking to see identical smiles on his nakama's face. Let's give it a shot, but first, we finish eating. With that, Luffy seemed to inhale all the food on the table in the blink of an eye, making Usopp's eyes widen and Nami and Zoro start muttering about finishing off our food for us again or some such stuff. Luffy paid them no mind. The chief tenet that he lived his life by was, when you're hungry, eat, regardless of the food was his or not. A king needed strength to rule his subjects, after all. Still casting looks towards Luffy, Usopp led them out of the restaurant. He was just about to lead them up towards the manor when Onion, Pepper, and Carrot jumped out from behind some nearby barrels, carrying wooden daggers and yelling, "For the Usopp pirates!" They began their charge straight at the trio of pirates, not even noticing their astounded captain. "Nothing permanent," Luffy nonchalantly commanded, before waiting until the last second to give Carrot, who'd aimed for him, a bash on the head that drove him into the dirt. In the same moment, Zoro had chopped Pepper with the back of his blade, and Nami had given Onion a kick in the kinmata. The three children dropped like rocks. Usopp looked appalled at the damage to his crew. "Oi, why'd you do that? They're just kids," Luffy shrugged and merely said, "They got in the way." With that, he arranged the three more comfortables on the side of the road to avoid foot traffic and allow them to be unconscious peacefully. Usopp glowered for a second before sighing in defeat and continuing with the journey up the hill. As they neared the estate, Usopp maneuvered them away from the foreboding bodyguards, leading them towards an unassuming hedge that was actually as sturdy a wall as the steel grate at the main entrance. With a knowing smirk, Usopp grabbed a square section of the hedge, revealing it to be a secret door. Holding a finger to his lips, Usopp snuck in through the hole, leaving the crew to follow in behind him. Luffy took one look and went, "Wow, this girl's living it up. This place is huge." Quick as lightning, Luffy's mouth was covered by Usopp's hand. "Shish," the marksman hissed before letting Luffy go. The pirate captain pouted but kept his silence. Usopp, with stealth worthy of Nami's operations, made his way to a tree near the south wall, where he proceeded to climb up and knock on the nearby window. A fair woman with fair hair and pale skin answered the door, a joyful expression on her face. "Usopp-kun, you're here. What story are you going to tell me today?" Usopp grinned, blushing faintly, and said, "Well, there was the time I was 5 when I fought off a giant goldfish, but I have something to ask you first, Kaya." At her confused expression, Usopp indicated Luffy and the gang at the base of the tree. "These guys are pirates that came to bask in the glory of Captain Usopp's presence, but they're in need of a ship. Being the proud and merciful captain that I am, I decided to help them. I was wondering if you might not mind lending them a ship." Kaya paused before regarding the crew. She noted Zoro's calm stance, Nami's confident air, and the sparkle in Luffy's eyes. A grin spread across her features. Kaya was a good judge of character. She opened her mouth to voice her approval but was interrupted by the harsh cry of, "Halt!" Everyone turned to look at an approaching man. He wore a fine tuxedo, oddly striped shoes, and wore slightly loose glasses over his sharp eyes, his dark hair immaculately combed. He possessed an intimidating air and made Usopp visibly start to panic. The man stopped a few yards away from the motley crew, looking up at them and saying, "You have no business here. Please leave before I am forced to call the bodyguards." He fixed his glasses with an odd motion of his wrist, not using his fingers at all. Luffy felt something off about the man. Call it King's intuition, but Luffy suspected that this man was more than he appeared. Kaya spoke up with, "Please, Kurahadal, don't mind them. They're friends of Usopp-kun, and they wanted to ask me," before she was cut off. "Please, Kaya Ajo-sama, don't defend them. They're obviously ruffians, and they don't belong." The crew's eyes narrowed at the insult, and Luffy started to ominously crack his knuckles. Kurahadal ignored them. "Is that Usopp-kun up there?" the caretaker asked, making Usopp jump. "I've heard quite a lot about you around the village. They say that you lie and make everyone's life difficult. I guess that's what one should expect since you're the son of the low-class pirate." A contemptuous sneer materialized on Kurahadal's face. Usopp's fear melted into anger in the space of a second. "What did you say?" Usopp asked with as much malice as he could muster as he used a hook in his bag to descend to the ground. Kurahadal glared at Usopp as if he were something dirty he'd gotten on his shoes. "Your father abandoned your mother and yourself so that he could spend his life pirating. He's a low-class thief and nothing more." Usopp began to see red. "Kurahadal, stop this," Kaya yelled, seeing Usopp angry. Kurahadal continued on with, "And it shows. You spend your days lying to the village and worming yourself into our Ajo-sama's life. What is it a low life like you wants from our Ajo-sama? Is it money? How much do you want?" The sound of flelled the air. Usopp was so angry he'd socked Kurahadal right across the face, an expression of undeniable rage on his face. The caretaker clutched his cheek from his position on the ground and cried, "You see that? I upset him, and he immediately turned violent. Such a dangerous person shouldn't be near the Ajo-sama." "Shut up," Usopp yelled back at him with such force that even Luffy was stunned. "You're calling my dad a low life? He's anything but. My father sails the seas as a true warrior of the sea. I'm proud to be related to him, for I'm the son of a pirate." A baby flicker of haki, too small to be felt, burst forth from Usopp as he said this, making Luffy pause in his advance to join Usopp in hitting the caretaker. Wow, he used haki just by proclaiming his pride in something. This guy really isn't just a coward. Unexpectedly, Zoro wasn't forced to hold Luffy back. Instead, Luffy gave a grin. Usopp had just become the object of Luffy's whims, and that was a place no sane person wanted to be. Luffy yelled, "Usopp!" The man turned from his glare at Kurahadal to regard Luffy with curiosity. "Don't just say it. Prove it," Luffy chuckled encouragingly. "We need a marksman. Join our crew and be a true warrior of the sea like your dad." Usopp's eyes widened in surprise, while Zoro and Nami just grinned a little at their captain's antics. He'd snagged a pirate hunter and a pirate thief so far, so a pirate heir was par for the course. Before the long-nosed man could even process the offer, Kurahadal stood up. He dusted himself off and said, "How you low-lives decide to gather together does not concern this household. All of you. Leave now." Usopp glared at him one last time before turning to leave the way he'd come, Luffy and the crew following behind him. On any other day, Luffy would have socked the man all the way to Fuchsia Village, but today he had a man to convince that being on the Straw Hat crew was the coolest thing in the world. "No," Usopp said, crossing his arms with finality. "Ah, come on, why not? Being a pirate's fun. We get to go adventuring, do whatever we want, and see the world. What more could you want? I'll even make it a point to go looking for your dad. Please come with us." It was shortly after the group had left the mansion, and Luffy had kept up a non-stop barrage of wheedling, which had so far been unsuccessful. Usopp was obstinate when it came to leaving his home. As he'd repeatedly said, what would the Usopp pirate crew or Kaya or the villagers do without my lies to excite them? Of course, the people in question would have told Usopp in a heartbeat to follow his dream, but Usopp didn't take that into consideration. Luffy, on the other hand, didn't care. "I don't care about that. You are going to be part of my crew." Usopp threw up his hands in exasperation before an interested expression came on his face. "Ooh, what's that?" Everyone turned to look at. Nothing. When they turned back around, a small dust cloud in the distance was the only thing to mark that Usopp had ever been with them. Zoro sighed. "I'll give that guy one thing. He can run like hell." Nami nodded in agreement, impressed that someone could run that fast. Luffy sighed. "Damn, and just when I was wearing him down. Now, we need to find him so I can keep working on him." As the three walked down the path, they came upon the slowly awakening Usopp pirate crew. Luffy grinned at the lucky coincidence before making his way over. In a matter of minutes, Luffy had reached the coast. Usopp was indeed there, staring off at the waves. "I know you're there," the man remarked as Luffy walked up. Luffy sat down next to Usopp, not saying anything yet. He could sense that Usopp was wrestling over something. The breeze was comforting as the two sat there at the border of the sky, earth, and sea, while one of them dealt with an internal crisis on an unprecedented scale. "When I was a boy," Usopp eventually said, getting Luffy's attention, "I used to go running through the village like I still do today, screaming that pirates were coming. I did it because I hoped if I said it enough times, it would come true. I wished that I would see my dad's ship on the horizon and know that I wasn't alone in this world. But he never came." Usopp sighed heavily, staring at his hands. "It never even occurred to me to go looking for him myself. I was too cowardly. So, I just stayed here and kept lying to everyone, including myself. It's all I know how to do." "But you guys?" Usopp shook his head with an unrecognizable emotion. "Wonder? Disapproval? Something else? You guys are so vibrant. Not an hour ago, I didn't know you existed, and yet you've done more exciting things in the time I've known you than I've had my whole life." Usopp chuckled to himself. "I want to go with you. I truly do. But, how can I? I've got onion and pepper and carrot. There's also kaya. I can't just pack up and leave." Luffy touched his straw hat and brought it down to shade his eyes. He spoke up suddenly. "You know what a pirate is? It's not some tough guy that goes around stealing from people, or pissing off the Marines, or even sailing through the Grand Line. A true pirate is a man who throws away his old life, all his friends and family and his home, for the sake of his dream." Luffy turned to face Usopp with a serious glint in his eyes. "To become the Pirate King, to become the greatest swordsman. A pirate hunter became a pirate. To get 100 million belly and draw a map of the world. A thief that hated pirates traveled with 2 of them. Is your dream strong enough for you to leave Kaya and your friends behind?" Usopp shuddered as the weight of the question fell on his shoulders. Fortunately for him, he didn't have to answer right then and there because of the arrival of 2 very suspicious people at the bottom of the cliff. Usopp turned to look at them. One of them wore a cowboy hat, heart-shaped sunglasses, and had some odd goatee. His wardrobe looked like it had come out of the closet of some demented disco dancer, and he was toying with an odd steel ring in his hand. The other man was none other than Kurahadal, the caretaker. Luffy was curious as to why the high and mighty guy was meeting at such a strange place with such a strange guy and joined Usopp in quietly listening to their conversation from their lofty perch. Kurahadal turned to regard the odd man. "Django, I thought I ordered you to remain inconspicuous. I find you lying in the middle of the road asleep with 3 kids. Don't tell me that you still have that problem." Kurahadal fixed his glasses again, acting in a completely different manner than he had at Kaya's home. He was darker, more commanding, and much scarier. The man spread his arms out in a calming gesture. "Calm yourself, Captain. I was just showing off to some kids. Anyway, what is this about? Your plan to insinuate yourself in the Ajo-sama's life and steal her fortune has played out beautifully for the past 3 years. My men are in place and raring to go. What possible reason do we have for this meeting, Captain Kuro?" Unbeknownst to the man, he had just provided a gold mine of information to the 2 young men above them. "See Captain Kuro? As in, Kuro of the Thousand Plans? He was one of the most notorious pirates in East Blue in his time. His planning abilities were unmatched. But the Marines executed him years ago. To think, Kurahadal was secretly him all this time." Usopp shivered next to Luffy, who was regarding Kuro with confusion. This guy used to be a pirate. Why is he hanging around here on land? If there was one thing Luffy knew, it was that no true pirate could resist the call of the sea. Either this Kuro guy was weak-willed, Luffy concluded, or he was really just that greedy for Kaya's money. The newly revealed Captain Kuro sighed in annoyance. Django, how many times must I tell you? We cannot simply kill the girl. It would be best if you hypnotized her into writing a will, leaving everything to her caretaker Kurahadal, namely me. I just wanted to make sure that chaotic rabble that is your crew WTLE subtlety. Kuro fixed his glasses yet again and regarded Django with a glare. Django's grin was a smidge more false than it had been before. It's all prepared, Captain Kuro. The men know that they just have to ravage the village and leave the accident to me. We just need your signal tomorrow at dawn. It's up to us to deal with them. Luffy talked to Usopp, only to see Usopp's voice becoming more distant. Looking back, Luffy observed Usopp disappearing over the cliffs at the bottom of the slope. Luffy could practically hear the liar's thoughts with his observation since the liar's ideas were so loud. I have to issue a warning to the villagers. I have to issue a warning to Kaya, Usopp yelled in his head as he rushed towards the settlement as quickly as he could. Usopp, now is not the time to be concerned. Luffy growled as he pursued the fleeing adolescent. Luffy only learned how quickly Usopp could go when he was motivated a fraction of a second later. As he hurried down the trail, he bumped across Nami and Zoro, who were both perplexed as to why Usopp had just sprinted by them seconds before. Luffy came to a halt and spent several minutes explaining the problem. Should we attempt to track down Usopp or go after this butler? With a contemplative expression on his face, Zoro inquired. On this island, we're outsiders. No one here would believe us when we say there are no false butlers. With a shake of her head, Nami expressed her dissatisfaction with the situation. Usopp is on his way back, Luffy said as he turned his head to the source of the weakening voice. Usopp was staggering along the trail, holding a gushing gash near his shoulder when the three arrived. No one believed me, he said. As he sat on a chair inside his little abode, Usopp mourned. While Luffy and Zoro sat about listening to Usopp's efforts to warn the villagers and Kaya about Kuro, Nami was cleaning his wound with the first aid kit Usopp had. Of course not. You say things like this all the time, and I've heard the boy who cried wolf tale before. Why did you expect them to trust you now, even if you're telling the truth? With a sneer, Zoro queried the long-nosed adolescent. If that's the case, I'll have to halt the invasion on my own. With the proper preparedness, no pirate will be able to reach the settlement. Usopp lit a fire in his eyes. No, we'll assist you. Usopp was taken aback by Luffy's smile, which made him look at him with surprise. Really? Are you serious about assisting me in defending the village? Usopp inquired. Isn't it true that we're friends? With his head twisted, Luffy inquired. So, what are your abilities? Usopp interrogated the three. I electrocute, choke, and engulf. Luffy said this while forming little black clouds on his hand. I slice, as he half unsheathed Wado Ichimonji, Zoro said. I steal. Nami smiled. I hide, you, too, are battling, all three pirates screamed at the liar. Later the crew saw a pirate crew on a ship sailing towards them. It meant they were the crew of Kuro. Who are they? Someone asked, noticing the strange crew. Who cares, we are going to be rich, prepared to rob, and I heard that this village has a gorgeous woman, one cheered, followed by everyone else. This caused Usopp to clench his teeth, ready to tear the bastards apart. Nami felt her anger rising. These were animals, but before they could do anything, a huge wave of pressure suddenly spread. Luffy, Nami thought. Turning around she saw Luffy had raised his hand, electricity engulfing his hand. Black clouds spread around the sky, bolts of lightning hitting the surface of the water near the ship, scaring the pirates. You're no pirates. You're trash, Luffy stated before Nami's eyes widened at what happened next. The following second, a dragon head made of white lightning slowly descended from the clouds, looking down right at the pirate ship. Reikuri, a massive bolt of lightning suddenly slammed right at the ship, causing a massive explosion of lightning, illuminating the whole area. Nami opened her eyes after the light went away. Instead of the ship, now stood black smoke, with parts of a ship floating on the water. More than 80% of the pirates were floating some distance away in the water. Their bodies weren't moving. Among the lucky ones, Django and two odd men that had hopped out of the water and seemed pretty pissed. Zoro yelled out from the top of the cliff, "Luffy, were you planning to leave some for me? You selfish idiot?" Nami and Usopp were silent beside him. Their jaws practically disconnected in their shock. Nami had gotten a brief taste of Luffy's true power when he faced Buggy, but this was something else. He can do it, he can really do it, she thought, her heart filling with hope for the first time since forever. Usopp, on the other hand, had never seen anything like this. Maybe he'd hit his head yesterday morning, and this was all a crazy dream. Sure, that would be more believable than the godlike strength this one man seemingly possessed. A man casting enormous lightning, destroying ships, yup, I am dreaming. Django was now officially scared for his life, while the newly arrived Siam and Butchie were in a rage to find that someone had harmed the ship. As the two prepared to turn this kid into casserole, an angry voice abruptly broke the air. What the hell is going on here? Everyone turned in unison to stare at the new arrival. Former captain of the Black Hat crew, Kuro of the Thousand Plans. The man carried a gym bag over one shoulder, and his face was livid. Kuro was enraged. The idiots that he once called his crew had been late, and when he arrived to see what the hold-up was, he found the ship destroyed, over half his crew unconscious in the water, and the brats still alive. Kuro saw this as his crew decided to have some fun in the sun instead of doing their job and was consequently ready to kill. He wasn't even going to bother asking for an explanation. He was going to kill the crew ahead of schedule and drag Django bodily to hypnotize the Ojosama afterwards. With practiced movements that hadn't deteriorated in the intervening 3 years, Kuro opened the gym bag and expertly withdrew and donned his infamous cat's claws, thickly padded gloves with a thin katana at each finger. As Kuro prepared himself, Luffy's crazy stamina made itself known, as the youth was suddenly ready for another round. He quickly issued orders to his crew. It wasn't fair for him to hog all the fun. "Zoro, you got the two weird guys behind me. Usopp and Nami handle the weirder guy. The caretaker's mine." Usopp might not have officially joined the crew, but Luffy's tone brooked no argument. Still not entirely sure that this wasn't a vastly complicated hallucination, Usopp pulled out his slingshot. The beauty of fighting like a coward was you didn't have to move. Nami grimly assembled her staff, thinking of the treasures she'd acquire from the pirates after this mess to motivate her. Zoro, meanwhile, looked like a kid at Yuletide. He assumed his classic stance, with a blade in each hand and between his teeth. Kuro narrowed his eyes but paid no heed. The kids could play around, but he was going to get his crew for this. Kuro, moving too fast to be seen, suddenly rushed forward, intent on making his crew pay for their ineptitude. Luffy's eyebrows raised in surprise before he threw a punch. The impossible happened. Kuro was hit when using the stealth foot. As if it were a signal, Zoro and Nami rushed forward to deal with their assigned enemies as Usopp lined up his sights. The still furious ship guards rushed forward to deal with the sword guy charging them, not even bothering with the slip of a girl that passed by them. Django, now so frightened that his hair had started to turn white at the roots, grimly took out his chakram. He'd deal with the girl before running away. Zoro charged forward, his swords practically a part of his body as he held them. His oath to Kaya, his normal motivation, was suddenly fighting for top spot with his awe over Luffy's displayman had decimated almost an entire crew with one move. Siam and Butchie took the offensive. Neko Yanagi Daikoshin, they cried before rapidly slashing with their clawed gloves. Zoro expertly stopped the assault cold with his swords. The two pulled away before Zoro could pull off a move. The two seemed to be discussing a new battle plan, but Zoro ignored them. Silently, he got into the stance of one of his strongest Santoryu techniques. Feel the power of the stance. Channel the power of the blades to their fullest. The world slowed as Zoro focused on the move harder than he ever had, almost feeling it as a comfortable presence beside his soul. Suddenly, Zoro realized that he was feeling something within his soul. It felt alive, wild, the essence of the primal joy Zoro felt when he really let loose. Is this Haki? Zoro didn't question how he had discovered the force or how he knew what it was. He just added it to the stance. Zoro gently seized the feeling, as if it were an animal, and focused on nothing else except the stance, the move to come, the blades in his grip. He felt the feeling cover his entire body, making him feel jittery, but he remained still as a statue. The partners had finished their plan and rushed forward to deliver a combo attack that would end this man's life like it was nothing. Tiger hunting prey, Zoro intoned, the words further refining his focus on the attack he would deliver. As the two came into range, their hands pulled back to deliver crippling slashes. Zoro moved, his blades coming down in a graceful, beautiful, yet deadly movement. In the space of a second, Zoro was behind his opponents, his swords all pointing forward. The veteran pirates seemed frozen for an instant before their chests erupted, blood gushing out in a morbid yet artistic spray. Zoro looked at his hands after pulling his sword back to their scabbards. "I'm not tired, I'm getting stronger," Zoro murmured. Nami kept on fighting against the man. He swung at her, but she beautifully dodged as if it was nothing. She couldn't help but have a feeling whenever the man tried to attack, but she could see his attacks. "Stay still, girlie," he growled, trying to attack again. Usopp prepared his slingshot, ready to fire when Nami dodged before swinging her staff right at the side of his head. The sound of bone cracking was heard. The man was bleeding severely from his head, his face filled with rage and anger. "Once I'm done with you, I will kill your precious crew," he yelled, rushing at Nami, whose eyes didn't see him but instead the monster who destroyed her life and her village. "Never," she yelled, hitting his jaw, breaking it. The man fell on the ground, but Nami struck again and again, finally stopping as the man had stopped moving, his face red with blood. Dead. Luffy saw Kuro moving towards him. Someone else might have thought that he was fast, but to Luffy, who had practiced against the likes of Garp, Shanks and Mihawk, this speed was nothing. Kuro moved, ready to slice him up. Luffy just closed his eyes. Kuro showed right in front of him, his claws just mere inches away from Luffy's throat before he stopped. Kuro couldn't feel anything, he wanted to move, yet he felt as if the time itself had stopped. His vision became blurry before he coughed blood. Looking at his stomach, he saw a fist covered in dark air. Luffy stopped his attack as Kuro fell on his knees, before coughing blood again. Laying on the ground, the man started making choking noises. His eyes turned from brown to red, but not just his eye color. His whole eye had turned red like blood. "You should be careful to not choke in your plans," Luffy said, as Kuro kept trying to breathe as his body slowly stopped moving. It was over. It was a few, rare quiet days of relaxation among the crew. Usopp had finally bowed to the inevitable. The three found his lies and boisterous attitude to be a great source of entertainment, though his constant requests to become captain got a trifle annoying. Kaya, though sad, was willing to let them go, and Usopp had sworn to return one day. Finally, on the day of their departure, the crew was given their treat. A caravel. Nami cried in joy as the ship was revealed to them. It was a good ship. The sails were new, the hull was sturdy, and the figurehead gave off just the same clueless innocent vibe their captain did. Mary proudly declared, "This ship may be of an old design, but it will carry you far. I call it the Going Merry." Kaya kissed Usopp before he left, much to the surprise of everyone. The marksman almost fainted. After that they had one last goodbye before the man climbed onto the ship, going to join his new crew, his new life, his new destiny. As they pulled away from the island and Luffy sat perched on the figurehead, the captain had only one thing to say. "We are coming, Grand Line." Nami, the amount of tears she shed was abysmally minimal, and in the beginning, she felt thoroughly alienated and disgusted by herself and guilty for her apparent lack of grief. Yes, there had been big, fat round tears in her eyes the moment the bullet's impact had thrown her mother's body backwards, like a broken marionette whose strings had all snapped at the same time. And that was it, really, for the longest time. Nami's tears stopped the moment that cold and clam hand had grabbed her by the scruff of her neck. Compared to the coldness of the shock, the sheer terror of seeing, of knowing beyond a doubt that Belmere was, that she couldn't possibly be, Arlong's hand was positively, disgustingly warm and alive. To this day, Nami remembers and marvels at the feeling of absolute clarity that poured into her mind that day while she was being carried away to where the fishmen had chosen to set up base. The memory of days that followed Belmere's death wasn't always as clear as the memory of the feeling of clarity she had experienced then. And in the years to follow, when she'd grown and matured and begun to question and analyze herself, she would often wonder, had her mind been truly that much sharper, or had the world only suddenly become a lot more blurred? Of course, it didn't matter, in retrospect, even if it was an interesting conundrum to contemplate. As they pierced her skin with the needle dipped in Hachin's ink over and over again, for hours to no end, there were no tears. As they laughed and joked about the foolhardy human Arlong had put into place on the day of their arrival, whenever Nami was within earshot, there were no tears. As Arlong himself tore up the small sketch of her mother's grinning face, there were no tears. As she argued and haggled for the village's worth, for every single house and life it contained and that she wanted to protect, to finalize their deal and pin that monster down if only verbally, there were no tears. As the villagers turned their back on her as one so unexpectedly, there were no tears. As the grave was dug on a cliff overlooking the vast oceans, there were no tears. As the casket holding her mother's lifeless form was entrusted to the island's life-giving soil, there were no tears. As Genzo spoke a few words over the grave, loud enough that it carried to the bushes where Nami crouched, hidden from everyone's sight, and simply remembered the woman that had given her the greatest gifts of all, twice, there were no tears. Not even when the crudely made cross was placed upon the grave as a marker were there any tears. No tears at all. But when the sun set on the day of Belmir's funeral, when the shadows invaded the house that had been the only home she'd ever known, the best and richest home she could have had, it now seemed to her, that was when the tears finally did come. And gods, did they come. Every piece of furniture held echoes of her mother, had her mother's love written all over it. Her mother's ghost was lingering by the stove, stirring the memory of tangerine sauce. Her shadow was gently tugging on the old, faded curtains as she waited for Najiko's blue hair to separate from the dark sky and long shadows to come home finally. Her voice echoed in Nami's ears, like an intake of breath that would, should be followed by a mouth, a tongue forming a word, forming her name. Nami. That was when the tears were there, suddenly, and broke through her lashes, through stubbornly pressed closed eyelids, very much like the force of nature they were. A tidal wave of emotion, of agony, of desperation, of denial, of anger. So much that she felt she was drowning in them. Her mother couldn't be dead. Her mother had no right to be dead. Her mother didn't deserve to be dead. How in the name of all that was holy could her mother truly be dead? How could she when she needed her, would always need her like air to breath and food to eat and water to drink and sun and wind and earth and all those things that essentially spelled life but that you never think about because they're always there, readily accessible and in abundance? Was it stupid of her to hope that the steps she heard outside of the house were her mother's? Was it delusional to pray and beg to every deity that the doors slowly swinging open and allowing the cool evening air access to the house was being opened the woman she knew, logically knew, to be dead and buried on a cliff with a view? Was it selfish of her to wish that the arms embracing her, rocking her back and forth in an attempt to soothe, were not her sister's but hers? Even as they cried and sobbed together, as tears painfully crawled down both of their faces, Nami couldn't stop herself from wishing, from hoping, from praying, dreaming, begging and bargaining with every deity that would listen to make it not real, to take it back. She'd do anything, give anything, sacrifice anything, anything, just please, please, I beg you, give us back our mother. What should I do? Please help us, mother. Name opened her eyes, almost screaming. Her eyes immediately looked around, fearing she was back in that cursed room, only to see she was in the new ship, going merry. She reminded herself, she sighed in relief as cold sweat rolled down her forehead, still trying to catch her breath. She was with her crew, she wasn't alone with that monster. Suddenly the memories of her mother rushed in. She felt her eyes welling, tears falling on her lap, his laughter ringing in her ears like a bell. Sha-ha-ha-ha-ha. Her fingernails almost tore the mattress of her bed, her teeth clenching, remembering his cursed laughter, laughing at the body of her mother, a hole between her eyes. She suddenly remembered the promise Luffy had given her. You're my nakama. I would go through hell for you. Her arms relaxed at his voice. Nami knew her captain wasn't lying to her. He spoke sincerely to her. The way he smiled at her. A smile slowly erupted on her face. Using her right hand, she wiped away the tears from her eyes and cheek. You're my nakama. Nami didn't know how, but she found herself standing right in front of Luffy's door. It was the middle of the night. The sea was as calm as ever. Now that Nami thought about it, She couldn't remember the sea being calm for so long. There should have been at least a storm by now. She wondered if they were just lucky or Luffy's storm fruit had anything to do with it. Raising her hand, she prepared to knock on his door. Taking a deep breath, she knocked 3 times before stopping. The door opened, revealing Luffy with his shirt on but not covering his chest. Nami knew Luffy had quickly just worn a shirt before opening the door. "Nami, what is it?" Luffy asked, concerned before noticing her red eyes from crying. He was about to ask what was wrong. "Luffy, can I come in? I need to tell you something," Nami requested, with a slight tone, almost as if she didn't want the rest of the ship to hear middle of the night. Luffy quickly nodded, opening the door wider, stepping aside as Nami walked inside. Surprisingly, she saw his clothes were well organized in a chair and not just around the floor. Luffy seemed to understand what she was thinking. "Makino, she made sure always to tell me that I should always clean my room, and whatnot," Luffy stated with a melancholy smile on his face before gesturing for Nami to sit either in his bed or chair. Nami sat at the edge of the bed. It was a king-sized bed, her legs outside of the bed's frame. Luffy sat at the chair near the bed, but Nami gestured for him to sit in the bed. Luffy said nothing but sat at the end of the bed across her. Turning her eyes at him, she felt her courage returning, her heart beating like a hammer on her chest. "Luffy, you said you would always help your nakama," she said, her voice insecure. "Of course, Nami," Luffy said in a heartbeat, with no second thoughts. "Do you consider me as your nakama? Always, Nami?" Luffy spoke, putting his hand on her shoulder, ensuring her. "Luffy. I need you to kill someone for me." "Who?" "Arlong, the Saw." She spoke the name with venom, her hands clenching against the mattress of his bed. "What did he do to you?" Luffy asked with a dangerous tone, the same tone he used against the likes of Morgan and Buggy. Nami found herself shedding tears. She started telling him but didn't stop until she told him everything, Arlong killing her mother, forcing her to draw maps for him, and the deal to buy the village with 100 million berry. Luffy held her close as she sobbed against his chest, her hands holding his shirt. "He will die, Nami. Slowly. He will pay for everything. You have my word," Luffy promised. Holding her close. The state of anger in Luffy caused violent winds to suddenly erupt around the sea, but not close enough to damage the ship. She cried for a minute before silence fell over them. Luffy held her close. The silence went on for 10 minutes before Nami pulled away. "Thank you, Luffy. You have no idea how much that means to me," Nami thanked him. Luffy noticed the mark on her shoulder, his hand touching her skin around the tattoo. "He marked me with his tattoo," Nami said. Luffy's eyes narrowed. "I will tear his whole arm apart for this," Luffy promised. This caused a dark smile on Nami's face, quite liking the thought of him being torn apart to shreds, to become nothing. She stopped her thoughts, her eyes were fixated on his eyes. The closeness made her feel good, his breath close to her face. The man in front of her had saved her 3 times, had trained her, done nothing but good things. Her cheeks went red. Luffy got concerned that Nami was perhaps sick. "Nami, are you see?" He was stopped by Nami's lips crushing against his mouth. Luffy's eyes widened, but the feeling of her sweet lips felt like nothing ever before, immediately made him wanting more. He kissed her back. A moan escaped Nami's lips as she swung her arms behind his neck, wanting more. Her tongue licked his lips. He opened his mouth, her tongue battling with his tongue for dominance. Luffy kissed back hungry before he immediately remembered, pulling away. Nami let out a sigh of disappointment. "I'm sorry, Nami," Luffy apologized quickly, moving slightly away. "Why are you apologizing? You're not my girlfriend." Makino and even Grandpa always told me that I should never kiss a girl that is not my girlfriend, Luffy explained. Makino, Grandpa and the doctor of the town had given him and his brothers a small talk when it came to women. Well, mostly the doctor, since his grandpa seemed not to like to explain that kind of stuff that much, and Makino would turn bright red. Nami smiled at his words before leaning closer to his face. Luffy couldn't help his eyes from going to her cleavage. The way her face was leaning close to his face made her cleavage quite open to him. "If that's the case, then I would be happy to be your girlfriend. Luffy, do you want to be my boyfriend?" Nami asked, her lips almost touching his. Luffy found himself surprised by her words. He had never thought a woman as beautiful as Nami would want him. "Warning, semi-lemon. I would like that." Luffy said as he closed the gap between them. Nami immediately returned the kiss with passion. Her body jumped on him, pressed against his. Luffy felt her breasts against his chest. Nami felt her body temperature skyrocketing, the heat between her legs. She left something she had never felt before. She felt lust, love and desire. She wanted more as her hands went to his shirt, wanting to remove it from him. But Luffy suddenly stopped kissing, making her pout in disappointment. She was about to ask. Nami, I'm quite happy to be your boyfriend, but this is just the beginning. Maybe we shouldn't go this far yet, Luffy stated despite being rock hard for her. His cock was very uncomfortable against his pants. Nami pouted. She wanted to take this as far as could go, but at the same time, she knew perhaps he was right. Very well, Luffy, but can I sleep with you? She asked innocently, despite crossing her arms right below her breasts, making them look larger, having the desired effect of gaining Luffy's attention, whose eyes moved at the valley of her breasts. Of course, Nami. You can sleep here whenever you want, Luffy said. Nami jumped in delight, before laying on the bed. Luffy behind her. She felt his arms holding her close. His arms felt warm, sending shivers of pleasure through her whole body. She couldn't stop her body. His hands felt so good. His chin resting on her shoulder, taking on her orange scent on her hair and skin. He quite liked her hair. They smelled like fresh orange, his breath sent tingling. His arms around her waist but not at her breasts. Nami, can I? Luffy asked against her ear. His tone alone made her moan in pleasure. Yes, please, you can touch me as much as you want, she moaned, her voice husky, filled with lust. Luffy moved his hand to her breasts, his palms not being able to hold her whole breasts, his fingers sinking on the valley of her breasts. Her smooth skin felt so good on his hands, her blue bra the only thing separating his hands from her nipple. Nami couldn't stop her moan. Yes, please, Luffy more, she begged as Luffy played more with her delicious-looking breasts, kissing her just below her earlobe. Her nipple had grown hard like diamonds. I like you, Nami, he whispered. I like you too, Luffy. Soon the sleep came over them, Luffy holding her close. Nami couldn't remember the last time she had felt so safe, so loved. My captain, I will do my best to ensure that you become the king of the pirates. Lemon and tomorrow Nami continued to steer her course while Zoro had went to the upper deck to swing his weight-covered practice blade. Right now, Luffy was actually taking care of one of the more important duties of being the ship's captain and designing the flag. Finished. Luffy declared loudly while holding up the black painted cloth. What do you think? That you badly need lessons was what they were all thinking. They could see what he had tried to create. They really could. If they squinted and tilted their heads a little, they could just make out a grinning skull wearing what was supposed to be Luffy's hat. Luffy, how can I say this? Said Nami, who was trying to think of a nice way to let him know that his flag was not that good. Your flag looks like crap, Zoro said, saving Nami the trouble. Luffy's brow furrowed in confusion. He looked down on it and eyed it with what would pass for him as critically. Really? What's wrong with it? Do you think it should look angry? Nah, it's fine. You're just crap at drawing, replied Zoro. For a second, I thought you just didn't like the design, Luffy stated, sighing in relief. Lucky for you. I, the great and powerful Usopp, just so happened to be a world-famous artist. Right. I don't believe you, so I've taken the task of designing our Jolly Roger on myself. Witness the awe-inspiring symbol of this migged another large black cloth. Wow, they had to admit that it was a really nice flag. Now, this showed real promise. From the flag, it was clear that Usopp had a steady hand and genuine artistic talent, as well as a serious case of narcissism. Not your symbol, idiot, Nami belted out along with a rap to the back of the liar's head. Usopp quickly drawn another flag with Luffy's design. With Luffy's powers, the flag was ready, and so were the sails. Bam! Luffy and Nami jolted up at the sound of something heavy hitting the deck, then jumping a mile as they came face to face with the business end of a cannon. Look what I found in the captain's quarters, gank. Usopp. Next time you want us to look at the ship cannon, don't point it at us. Usopp rubbed his head and looked at his seething shipmates. Don't be like that. This thing not even loaded, see? Kaboom! The smell of gunpowder, deafening noise and falling onto the floor when the cannon wheeled backwards from the blast told him otherwise. The cannonball skimmed above the ocean, hitting a small spit of land and blowing it to pieces. Ow! My head. He once again was rubbing the back of his skull gently. Nami turned to Luffy after hitting Usopp. What member do we need now? Nami asked, looking at Luffy. We need a cook? Grumbled Zoro while seated in the corner, feeling too cool to sit at the table like a normal person. Yeah. Someone who can tell at a glance what we can and can't eat out on the ocean and how to prepare it safely. A cook is almost if not just as important as a navigator on long voyages. Luffy agreed with Zoro's and Nami's reasoning. Luffy promised her last night that they would deal with Arlong after they got another crew member. Nami was fine with that, she still had a month left to pay. Later, come out and face me, a deep masculine voice yelled from outside on the deck. Luffy was on his feet in an instant, rushing out the door to see a guy with a canteen taking up his left cheek, waving a thick saber about and wrecking whatever he could see. Hey, who the hell do you think you are tearing up my ship? Luffy asked angrily. The man sneered. His glare was visible even past his kick-ass sunglasses. It doesn't matter who I am. There's no point in telling someone who I'm gonna kill. He charged at Luffy with his blade held over his head to cleave the boy in half. It was all too easy for him to simply sidestep the sword as it swung down, then bring his fist up casually to deliver a tremendous gut punch to his attacker, making the swordsman cough out a small amount of blood before falling limp on Luffy's arm. I didn't ask who you are. 'Cause I really don't care. But I won't stand guys like you just jumping onto Mary and trying to wreck it. He tossed the attacker towards the cabin wall, making a loud thud when he hit the timber, followed by sliding down and sitting in a manner similar to the crew's own swordsman. Johnny? Zoro exclaimed at the sight as he stepped out of the cabin. The downed man, despite seconds before being tossed around like a rag doll, was back on his feet in an instant at the sound of the familiar voice. Surprise and relief on his face. Zoro, my brother. Zoro has a brother. The captain of the ship was quite surprised. In the same way, Usopp was quite a liar, or Nami was quite a thief. Relax, Luffy. It's just a thing that swordsmen have with each other. Zoro explained before turning back to his old friend. He looked around a little first, then asked something that was nagging at him. Hey, where's Yosaku? Usually, you guys are harder to separate than white from rice. Johnny started tearing up, which naturally meant that every hole on his face was starting to run like a freaking river. Brother, it's horrible. Johnny is what? Dying. A new man was sprawled out across the deck as he dropped dead there. He wore a long coat, ugly checkered shorts and a black t-shirt that was quite clearly covered in fresh bloodstains, as was the symbol-less forehead protector that he wore on his shaved bald head. This came upon him all at once, said Johnny. 1 minute he was fine, then bam, he collapses. His teeth start falling out like they were held in with old gum, his wounds reopened, and he can barely move. He was too sick to be moved, so I shored on that little spit of land over there. That is until you decided to shoot a cannon at us. Usopp felt guilty and looked down in shame. Sorry. You're completely forgiven, Johnny said straightly. Well, that was easy, Nami commented dryly. What was the point in being mad if you forgave that quickly? What's the point in getting angry? My brother is going to die anyway. He brought his arm up to his eyes and rubbed them. My brother and I have been traveling the East Blue for years, picking off the small-time bounties and ending a few reigns of terror before they even really start. Sure, we're not one of the greats, but we've managed to make a name for ourselves. He snorted and bit back his tears. But that's all over now. My brother and all we accomplished together are gonna die right here. You idiot! The men turned to see Nami march up to Yosaku's downed form, poking and prodding him and lifting his lips to check his mouth like a horse. Nami, Zoro exclaimed. Show some respect for the almost dead, added Usopp. Usopp, she snapped at him. Go into the galley with Zoro and juice about a dozen limes, then bring it back here. The two just looked at her in confusion. Go? The second time got the required response. The two raced back up the stairs and into the ship's kitchen, returning about a minute later with a tankard of lime juice which Nami instructed to make the sick man drink. Looks like you're lucky that we shot at you. Otherwise, you never would have come aboard, and your friend would have soup-bed to scurvy, smirked the navigator, trying not to laugh at the fact that if her newest nakama hadn't almost killed them, one of them would be dead for sure. Scurvy? That sounds familiar, Johnny said, rubbing his chin, trying to remember where he'd heard that before. Nami nodded. It should. Scurvy used to be about as common as a sunburn for sailors. You get it if you don't get enough fruits and vegetables in your diet, which used to cause problems since they didn't have proper techniques to preserve them for longer voyages. Nowadays only people going on short trips or the brain-dead travel without any fruit or veg. Yua. Would you believe we were doing the first one? No, I would not. Nuts. Johnny was impressed. Wow, so you are a doctor. Nami looked at him like he was stupid. This isn't doctoring. Practically anyone who ever goes sailing has to know this. Weren't you ever taught that? Suddenly there was a rustle beneath them. They didn't have time to react before the dying man at their feet jumped up and embraced his friend in a manly hug. I'm completely healed, cheered Yosaku, waving his arm about merrily while giving everyone a big goofy and completely intact smile, causing the Straw Hats to wonder if he had eaten some sort of healing devil fruit, before collapsing back to the floor unconscious with blood pouring out of his mouth. Nami turned to her shipmates. What did we learn today? Always prepare for long voyages, said Usopp. Don't you think that you'll be healed immediately after being cured? Guessed Zoro. That did not understatement the sea, Luffy said. Good enough. Eventually, the talk came back to cooking, with Luffy stating that they needed someone who also would want to be in the sea for a long time and be a pirate. Can't be just anyone either, said Zoro while lazing against the mast. If he's coming aboard this ship, then they can't just cook. They have to be able to defend themselves at least. Johnny, who was busy tending to the still ill Yosaku, perked up at the description. Brother, I know of such a chef. Zoro and the rest turned to him. You do? Johnny nodded. Yeah, but getting him to join might be a real pain. Luffy just grinned in right and then. Just tell us where to go. Later after 2 days, the new people in the ship soon found out that Captain Luffy was a slave driver. At 7 a.m., the whole crew was awake, first eating breakfast before Luffy started training them as if there was no tomorrow, with Usopp being tired within an hour after they started. Right now, the crew was just resting before a ship soon came into view. It wasn't exactly a fish. It was a fairly large ship with a big fish head for the figurehead and a large fish tail for the rudder. It had 2 masts that had their masts furled up, and from what the crew could see, several anchors since the boat barely rocked against the waves. They could tell that the ship obviously wasn't built for speed since it was almost completely round and about as dynamic as a brick. I ain't kidding. Johnny huffed. This is Barati, the Barati, as in the famous ocean-going 5-star restaurant? I hear that this place has the best and most exotic food outside of the Grand Line, and you don't even need to book a table since not everyone can get to it, exclaimed the giddy Nami, who, after so long of eating only the basics, was ready for some civilized cuisine. Suddenly a deafening roar came out of nowhere, rocking the ship. Mmeeatt, the storm boy moaned loudly. Visions of foods the likes of which he'd never tasted filling his vision. Zoro sighed and grasped the back of his captain's shirt. We better hurry inside before he freaks out everyone in the restaurant. Yeah, right, brother. I remember your face when I told you, he often comes here. Yosaku snidely remarked, coughing a little as he still wasn't 100%. Zoro grinned in a manner usually reserved for men who twirl their facial hair between their fingers, sending a chill up everyone but the hungry captain's spine. Of course, that did nothing to match the absolute terror they felt when a massive thunderclap echoed through the air, and the ocean just next to Mary exploded, causing the small ship to rock harshly. Usopp landed on his behinds while Zoro unintentionally let go of Luffy in surprise as Luffy grabbed Nami not to fall. Pirate S, surrender or die, a male voice shouted out past the waterspout the explosion made. It was a marine vessel, all right. The butt-ugly zebra stripe pattern it had and the word, Marines, in big, bold letters painted across the sail left no one wondering that. Wait. I don't recognize your Jolly Roger, the voice said again, coming from the impeccably dressed man aboard. He was a fairly tall man, not all that surprising since short Marines don't garner much in the way of intimidation, and reasonably well built, showing he could probably hold his own in a fight if he wasn't afraid of getting his purple and black pinstripe suit ruined. His non-girly pink hair was combed back in part at either side of his rather average and forgettable face. On his fists, however, were a pair of unusual knuckle dusters. Instead of the smooth design that flowed with every bump of a finger joint, 4 screw heads were over each of them. Well, well, well. If you don't just look like a bunch of kids playing pretend of your daddy's boat. The man taunted, I'm Lieutenant, Iron Fist, full body of the Marines. And who might you brats be? Are you really pirates or just pretending? We're the Straw Hat Pirates. We just made our Roger 2 days ago, Luffy stated, standing in front of his crew. Oh, who's the captain? Full body asked, scanning the crew. I'm the captain, Luffy stated. He noticed Usopp from the corner of his eyes, slightly moving forward and ready to raise his hand and perhaps say something. But Luffy sent a wave of Conqueror's Haki at him, which caused Usopp to almost fall flat on his face, shaking in fear. Luffy knew it was all fun and games within the crew, but Usopp needed to realize that it was another thing entirely when in front of strangers. Especially Marines or other pirate crews. The Marine focused on Zoro briefly before stopping on Johnny and Yosaku. You two are those low-rank bounty hunters. Jamie and Kosaku or something, right? Jamie narrowed his eyes behind his glasses. That's Johnny and Yosaku. Oh, like it's important, Full Body smirked. From the look of it, you two were kidnapped by these no-name rookies. That's kinda sad because I don't think even the weakest of crews would waste their time recruiting a couple of idiots who've never claimed a bounty past a few million. Johnny said with his hand to his ear. Brother, I think this 2-bit Marine just insulted us, he said in a mocking tone. Yosaku took a drag on his cigarette and nodded, bringing his hand up to take the cigarette and discreetly cough up some blood. Yeah. We can't let some color-blind idiot tarnish our good name. Without a second thought, they drew their swords and charged at Full Body, jumping over Mary's side and directly at the Marine boat. Get ready, you Marine peacock. Without flinching, Full Body brought his metal-knuckled right fist to block against Johnny's swords, smashing through the blade like plaster and ramming his fist right between the bounty hunter's eyes. His unguarded fist corkscrewed, both deflecting Yosaku's sword away from him and catching him in the solar plexus. The two were dropped like weights. The Marine then picked up the two and, with minimal effort, flung them back onto Luffy's ship face first. A Marine's rank reflects his power like a bounty reflects a pirate. You two couldn't make it past ensign or break a million berry like you are. Know your limits, he sneered. Fool buddy. A female moan came from inside the Marine ship cabin just before a door opened, and a pair of thin, hairless arms reached out to grasp his. Come on, quit picking on those kids. You know the Barati doesn't hold tables if we're late. He looked into the cabin and smiled. Fine. He turned back to the Straw Hats. Today's my day off, and this ship isn't made for capturing S like you, so I'll leave for now. But if I see you again out there, you'll be mine. With that, the ship began to sail away. Luffy, Zoro and Usopp stared after the ship while Nami knelt down beside Yosaku to check the damage. Back on the ship Full Body, leaving the cabin he was in and covered in lipstick marks, turned to an ensign keeping an eye on the pirate ship they were leaving. Let's nip this in the bud, okay? Aye, sir. The Marine said and lit the cannon, sending the round shell at them with a loud boom. Full Body watched almost in slow motion as the ball went rocketing at the crew. Glad he stopped something that hadn't even started. He was so gonna enjoy this. Or at least that's what he thought until the cannon stopped just before hitting the ship. Luffy, they're gonna fire on us. He then followed his first instinct to jump so the explosion would carry him to safety. Of course, the cannon hadn't even been fired yet, so instead, he just crashed face first beside Johnny. Boom. Just as the cannonball was fired, Luffy jumped onto the bulwark before grabbing the ball in his hands. The bounty hunters and Usopp's jaws were hanging at their knees. Nami just smirked. She found herself quite liking when Luffy showed his strength, and Zoro was more annoyed than anything that he hadn't had the chance to see if he could split it in two before it exploded. Full Body, on the other hand, was angry. Luffy grinned as he threw the cannonball around his hands as if it was a mere toy. Do you want this back? He asked innocently. It collided with the Marine that had shot the cannon and sent him crashing into the captain's cabin hard enough to make the wood crack. Back on going, Usopp had lifted his jaw back up and was staring after the Marine vessel. He made a mental note never to be surprised by whatever his captain does. Soon the pirate crew walked inside the restaurant. It looked quite good. Luffy couldn't wait until they ate food. They soon chose a table. Luffy and Nami sat close to each other, his arm around her waist. Usopp looked shocked. He hadn't thought the two-ust raised an eyebrow before shrugging his shoulders. Who cares? A blonde suddenly came over to their table, eyeing Nami with hearts on his eyes. Nami immediately knew she could play this kind of person like a fiddle. The sea has brought such a beautiful woman as you into our restaurant. What can I serve you, my lady? The blonde spoke slightly, bowing at Nami, who started acting as if she was impressed. Luffy just rolled his eyes. Oh, thank you for the compliment. I like everything on the menu, but they're quite expensive, Nami said, playing the innocent girl masterfully. Zoro murmured, which, under his breath. Sanji had hearts on his eyes, almost drooling from his mouth. No need to pay. For such a beautiful lady such as you. There's no price for you. We are grateful to have you here, Sanji stated, walking away, ready to prepare the dishes. Luffy smiled, kissing Nami on the cheek, who quite liked it. The crew suddenly noticed the captain with his date, acting all smugly. Sitting across from a beautiful woman and would soon be eating the most delicious food in all the seas. The admiring hushed whispers made it all the sweeter he of the other patrons. This was how it should be. The waiter was at their table in just a few scant minutes. He poured their wine while balancing their food in his other hand and on his head. Full Body picked up his glass and sniffed it, catching the eye of his date. He took a delicate sip of the wine and swirled it in his mouth gently before swallowing. Ah, a delicate bouquet from North Mikuo. I'd know that rare taste anywhere. A wine that is dry, full-bodied and slightly acidic such as this could only be a Terutsubulgestein. Right, waiter? He lapped up the sounds of amazement at his wine-tasting skills. Completely wrong, sir. Full Body coughed and glared at the waiter. North Mikuo doesn't make red wine, and I don't know what you think full-bodied or dry meant either, but this wine certainly isn't either. The chef smiled without dropping his cigarette. And I'm the assistant chef Sanji, not a waiter. Sanji was certainly dressed like a waiter. He was tall, thin and dressed in a black double-breasted jacket suit. A blue striped shirt and black tie. He had bright blonde hair combed to cover his left eye, with strange whirlpool eyebrows. He put down the soup he balanced in front of the giggling woman and livid marine. The admiration had turned into mocking laughter. This idiot had made him a laughing stock. He'd paid extra to have that bit set up so he could impress his date. How dare this punk do that to him? He took something from his pocket and discreetly dropped it in his food. A gag toy he'd confiscated from one of his men when he thought to play a trick on his commanding officer. Hey, what's the big idea? He crowed just as Sanji had turned to leave. There a problem, sir? The lieutenant snorted. You're damn right there is. Do you mind telling me what a fly is doing in my soup? Sanji looked down at the offending bowl, seeing a small mayfly floating in the creamy broth. It looks like the backstroke to me. The tittering and whispers turned into full-blown guffaws as the marine was completely made to look like an idiot. Now, if you'll excuse me, I crashed. The offending bowl, along with the hardwood table it was sitting on, were broken into pieces when a metal-covered fist came crashing down on it, sending crystal and cutlery everywhere. People stopped their dining and mocking suddenly while chefs ran into the restaurant from the kitchen to see what the commotion was about. Who the hell do you think you are dealing with? Full Body snarled, standing up and glaring at the assistant chef. I'm Iron Fist, Full Body of the Marines. Not some run-of-the-mill nobody you think you can mess with. The charming humor drained from Sanji's face. He kneeled down at the broken table and looked at the two broken and empty bowls, their former contents spilt and inedible. If you'd just taken out that rubber fly you put in, you could have eaten the soup, Sanji said flatly, making the whispering at the drama goes up that much more. I'm a customer, you crap waiter, Full Body retorted. That mean I paid you to treat me like royalty, not a court jester. The chefs watching all paled considerably. Sanji don't. Sanji stood up to his full height. He was about an inch or so taller than the marine and glared him down with his single visible eye. That right? And I suppose you think money gives you the right to act like a D. Messer right. The end result was a pink-haired and purple-suited man now sporting a red face being held by his jaw up in the air by an angry chef. "The first and only rule of the Barati," he said with no slight edge, "don't waste food." Full Body could help but gulp out in fear. This really wasn't his day. He continued to think that when he found himself flying through the air to land on the floor, whacking the back of his head onto the back of a table. Sanji, what the hell da ya think you're doing? Patty cooker was. The patty cooker of the boat. In charge of grilling, braising, frying and baking burger patties as well as steaks and chops. Patty, the sailor man, grabbed Sanji by the wrist, being careful not to touch the hands, and glared at him. "You idiot. The #1 rule of this establishment is that the customer is king. They're the lifeblood of the business. So why, pray tell? Why is his lifeblood leaking out of him?" Sanji pulled his arm out of the cook's grip and shrugged. He wasted food. The larger cook gripped the side of his head. "Ah, what the blast is it with you and food? You're gonna get us closed one day, you idiot." "Yeah, like today." Full Body moaned and got up. "I'm going to make sure that this madhouse is shut down. And this lousy waiter is put away for a long time." "Not if I send you away first," the cook said calmly, earning a horrified look from Full Body and a gasp from almost everyone else. Luffy watched in interest. He was quite impressed by the blonde. Zoro caught up with what Luffy was thinking and prayed that he wouldn't choose the pervert. The other chefs rushed the blonde, grabbing at him every which way to stop their comrade from making a bigger mistake than he'd already made. "Chef Zeph, a little help," said one of the cooks, restraining Sanji. Zeph's reaction was immediate. His peg lashed out at the teen, catching him where the neck meets the shoulder and sending him to the floor. "Are you trying to make us go under, you eggplant? Well, at least you know how to discipline the customer. Not that that's going to make me reconsider shutting you down," chuckled Full Body while pulling himself up. Only to be sent back to the floor by the angry Zeph. "Are you insane? Do you know who I am?" groaned the Marine, trying once more to pick himself up. Zeph was the owner and head chef of the Barati. In his youth, he had a tall and imposing figure, but years had worn away at the tall side a little, leaving him with only the imposing part. The head chef snorted. "Yeah, you're the lousy asshole that thinks he can shut me down. Feel free to try. We'll leave a place as the dishwasher boy open for you when you get laughed out of the Marines." Full Body stared at the elder man with wide eyes. This was the place that had everyone singing praises? Were these guys even really cooks? Just as he was thinking about the implausibility of the situation, the entrance flung open, and a Marine ran in. "Lieutenant Full Body. He's escaped," the Marine declared. "That Krieg pirate we caught a few days ago busted out of the holding cell and beat the whole crew half-T." The Marine's chest exploded in a shower of blood when a bullet passed through, causing the man to fall to his knees on the floor, gasping for life. "How did he escape? We haven't fed him, so how?" the Marine yelled as the Marine died slowly. This caused Zeph to kick the captain far away from his restaurant. The door swung open. Everyone turned to see the new arrival. He was thin, almost unhealthily so, and there were bags under his EY with a serpent design on the back over a dark green shirt and pants, all of them dirty and tattered. He looked like he'd been through hell and emerged out the other end. In one hand, he held a pistol. Silence reigned over the restaurant. The man walked over to an empty table and sat down in a chair, his feet on the table. He spoke, his voice a dry rasp. "I don't care what it is. Just get me something to eat." An uneasy murmuring broke out among the establishment patrons, anxious about the aura of danger around the man. The Straw Hats didn't care much but noticed he was starving. "Welcome, mere bastard," the man said, with nothing but cheesy compliance in his voice. "Do you have any money to pay for your meal?" the burly cook asked, that freaky-ass smile still on his face. The starving man aimed at the cook's head. "Do you take steel?" he asked, obviously used to intimidation tactics. The cook's smile turned into a sneer within nanoseconds. With no forewarning, the man swept the chair out from under the pirate. As the starving man fell to the ground, the cook whirled the chair above his head and brought it down quite heavily on the man's back. Luffy didn't like what he saw, but he was quite curious about what Sanji would do. Nami had seen worse, Zoro didn't particularly care, and Usopp was terrified of the man's obvious strength, hence the lack of intervention on their part. Zeph muttered under his breath, "Patty, you continue to disappoint me," before returning to the kitchens. Sanji disappeared, and the crew was left to eat their meal, though with much less of an appetite. Luffy exited the restaurant, looking to check up on the man. To his mild surprise, Sanji was already there, laying a plate of food in front of the pirate. The man seemed shocked at the display of kindness, while Sanji merely leaned against the railing and lit a cigarette. "Oi, eat it. You must be hungry." The man was starting to tear up as the aroma of the food hit his nostrils, but he turned away. "This is worse than being kicked out. I won't accept pity. My pride as a man and as a pirate won't let me. Take it away." Sanji merely repeated his command. The pirate crumbled, and he started to eat like a starving dog. As he ate, his tears broke free, flowing freely down his face. "Delicious, delicious, it's too delicious. I've never had anything this good," he admits through his full mouth, trying to hide his tears. Sanji merely grins. Luffy sits on the railing beside Sanji. "You're a pretty nice guy, to feed him even though he couldn't pay. You're pretty strong too. Why don't you join my crew?" Sanji looks up incredulously at Luffy, who merely waits for a reply. He had made his request. He would wait for an answer and then nag until the answer was yes if it was a no. "Not a chance. That beauty of yours is amazing, but death itself couldn't drag me from this restaurant. That old fart needs me, whether he'll admit it or not. Besides, I have no interest in being a pirate." Sanji blew the smoke cloud in Luffy's face. The starving man, now complete, turns to face Luffy. "You're a pirate, aren't you?" Luffy nods his head. "Where are you headed?" "The Grand Line." Sanji raised an eyebrow, but the man seemed to almost choke in shock. "Take that back. You don't want to go there. You can't imagine the horrors in that wretched ocean." "No, I'm going to become the Pirate King, and I will never stop until I achieve my dream." Navy HQ Garp was very busy. He was sweating, struggling, on the brink of defeat. Breathing heavily, he narrowed his eyes at his enemy. His enemy had grown stronger. "You will not defeat me," Garp declared loudly at his enemy. Before eating his 809th donut, eating in delight was quite delicious, but he was trying to break the world record of eating the number of donuts eaten within an hour. The record was held by a pirate of Big Mom's crew. Garp had forgotten his name but didn't bother to try and remember. As he prepared to eat another one, the door swung open, almost falling on the floor. Inside walked his oldest friend, Fleet Admiral Sengoku, who, unlike Garp, looked furious. "What now?" Garp asked, bored, knowing he must stop fighting with his eternal enemy and fight another day. "Another good rookie," Sengoku stated, slamming a bunch of wanted posters on the desk. This had Garp's attention, wondering if Luffy had already started making name, despite being a bit too soon for that. "Who?" Garp asked curiously. "Portgas d'Ace," Sengoku simply stated. On the outside, Garp didn't have much of a reaction, but inside he was grinning like a madman. "What's so special about him? What did he do to piss off the Marine?" Garp asked with an uncaring tone, picking on his nose. "Not the Marine, the world government," Sengoku stated with a grave tone. Garp stopped whatever he was doing after hearing his statement. "World government? Did they find out?" "No, that can't be it. If it were, the Marine would waste no time to put Gold d'Ace on the wanted poster." "What has he done?" Garp asked with more interest. Sengoku turned to his old friend and told him what had happened. By the end, Garp looked shocked, but not for the reasons that Sengoku thought. "That's my grandson," Garp thought as he looked at his new wanted poster. "Wanted dead or alive, Portgas d'Ace 956,480,000 berry."